for the work that you do. Now, that being said, I do have some concern. In your conversation, you mentioned the funding crisis that threatened last year, SEPTA service cuts, fare increases, and the like, which really had all of us and the legislators in Harrisburg extremely nervous about what that was going to mean for our constituents. But then, there was this, article I came across in the paper that we were giving away 5 properties in very desirable neighborhoods along the Chestnut Hill East and the Chestnut Hill West line to a developer for 99 years for $1. It was the first of its kind agreement, and it certainly should be the last of its kind. Also, I want to point out that another piece of real estate SEPTA owned was leased to a developer in Ambler, and that was just this year, and they're paying $402,500 per year with annual 3% increases for a total of $236 million going to SEPTA over 99 years. So help me understand, $236 million or $1? Like, help me understand, help it make sense. Make it make sense.
Sure, I would love to do that. So the 2 examples are really, really vastly different. What we leased for $1 were the station buildings, not the whole property. The station still belongs to SEPTA.
Yes.
The station building, which in many cases will likely be transformed into some retail space, coffee shop,
Sure.
Food service place. So that is a much smaller investment for anyone than the property that we're speaking of out in Ambler, excuse me, or Conshohocken, where it's an entire parcel that will be developed into housing with a parking garage and maybe retail. So it is a little bit different in the approach that we took. So
I have no doubt that it's different, but at the same time, $1 for 5 properties is outrageous when you're asking us for money. It is outrageous that these kinds of conversations are even being had, and that SEPTA is having the financial cliff that, threatens us all. For those of us who ride SEPTA now, who have ridden SEPTA and respect the work that you all are doing, for those of us who care about public transportation, it is really quite outrageous that SEPTA would give away this very valuable property on a very desirable line, the Chestnut Hill East and the Chestnut Hill West. It is just, I just really cannot make sense of what has happened here.
I understand. I certainly understand your position, but what I will say is we tried to lease those properties individually, and we went through a bid process that wound up at $1. These properties. I'm sorry.
Don't want to cut you off, but I would say this. In saying that you went through a bid process, we were never contacted. So I don't know who like if you needed some help or, we're looking for some minority participation. Because the other thing I want to mention is that there is no minority participation on these properties. And that is as well shameful when you look at the overall ridership that supports SEPTA day to day.
And certainly the first time that you and I spoke about this, that was one of your chief concerns, is we had not engaged you well enough. And I acknowledge that is probably the case. So we have done a much better job on the Germantown property, for example, that I know we've engaged you in your office a great deal, and you've given us great feedback on that. So we are learning from that lesson that you pointed out to us on how better to engage with council, how better to engage with your teams and the communities. So yes, certainly there was, we could have done much better in our communications with you during that process.
Okay, that doesn't fix it.
Understood.
And as I understand it in our research, these were properties from the original, before it was SEPTA, it was PTC?
Probably long before. It's railroad property, so it's likely Pennsylvania Railroad or Reading Railroad.
And when it was PTC,
yep.
Part of the conversation that we've been advised of is that the leasing of these properties there is some question as to the legality of the leasing of the properties because they are actually PTC properties that were leased to SEPTA. So there is a question as to if these properties could be sublet. And so that's a conversation that we will have.
Okay.
But I just think, like the optics of this really look horrific for SEPTA. And again, we're out here selling this product, and the product is, if you're connected, you can get 5 properties for $1 for 100 years. Sounds great if you're in the loop, if you're on the end. But for most of us, like this looks like, somebody got a hookup. Plain and simple, somebody got a hookup. And as we're talking about trying to put more money into programs like Zero Fare, that's where that money comes from. That's where we get those dollars from. So I know you get it. I know you understand exactly where I'm coming from because, again, we have had that conversation before. 2 other things I wanted to mention just briefly, and that is that SEPTA operators, I don't know if you know this or not, bus operators are being blamed for tickets that if people are in bus lanes and the bus automatically gets, gives them a ticket,
Right.
then the operator is assumed to have done something, signaled them, somehow caused that ticket to happen. So, we already have, some concern about keeping our operators safe. That's something I think that SEPTA really needs to look into. And the other thing really quickly was I was glad to hear you say that you want clean stations. You want your stations to be clean at all times. It shouldn't matter if somebody's dropping by or whatever. The station really just should be clean. Because we had this conversation previously with a general manager who said, well, we're doing the best we can. No, that's the wrong answer. The stations were pretty dirty. I'm glad to hear you say that. I do have a concern about the lack of bathrooms in the subway system. I can't remember who mentioned that. Was that, okay, okay. My colleague, Councilmember Landau, because I have a connection with SEPTA in the subway system. And as an example, the elevator at the North Philadelphia station, which is Broad and Lehigh, is constantly broken. And it's broken because people are using it as a restroom. And so SEPTA needs to figure out how to get restrooms in the stations. It's really just that simple. I know it's probably a whole lot more expensive to send out a technician to fix the mechanics on an elevator that are eroding because someone is urinating constantly, in the elevator system. So if SEPTA could figure out how to make that happen, I think in the long run, it's actually going to save you all some money on those kinds of repairs. So thank you, Mr. President. That's my question.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes Councilman Dr. Ahmed.